Welcome to Mahogany and Willow. Hi, Jeanette.
Hi, Tiffany. How are you?
I'm doing really well. How are you?
Good.
Good. I have a question for you.
Yes.
And this is going to be interesting to see what comes of this little conversation between you and I. What do you define perspective as?
Well, it's interesting because when we were talking about this, my first reaction was, I believe that perspectives are as individual as fingerprints, you know? So it was kind of interesting to think about, you know, the concept is we are always told we need to see things from others' perspectives. And I was trying to figure out if that's even a possibility. And so while I was doing that, I was kind of researching a few things. And I did come across something that was very similar to a definition, which is perspective is the way individuals see the world. It comes from their personal point of view and is shaped by life experiences, values, current state of mind, their assumptions, and a whole lot of other things. And I thought it was fascinating because it really went down. I mean, it kind of reiterated what I was thinking about it, as in it's such an individual perspective.
Yeah.
Or an individual thing, that perspective is. And because then you think, can we see from another's point of view? I really want us to know that. Right. I really want to know.
It is fascinating because I kind of pride myself on trying, and I'll say trying, capital T, to put myself in people's shoes and to see the other side and to listen to the other side. You know, if you're having an argument with somebody and each of you has your own perspective, this is what I saw. Well, this is what I saw. Well, this is what I heard. Well, that's what I heard. And this is what I feel. Well, that's what I felt. So to be able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes or from their vantage point, which to me also is perspective, it really helps in relationships. It's very easy to just use your emotions, your high emotional state at the time in the middle of something to just say, that's it, that's gospel. What I saw is what I saw without any deviation, when in reality, there's always another perspective. And it could be anything from an argument with your spouse to witnessing a crime, to witnessing something that each person has their own take on something. I think perspective helps us to better our relationships with others and being able to interact, communicate back and forth, reiterate points, see the other side is really key to me.
Definitely. I know that we can only really actively consider another person's point of view if we can suspend judgment.
Right.
And I think that probably is the pitfall in most cases in seeing another's perspective. Is we know ourselves so well. How do we put ourselves or try to consider something from another's perspective when my thoughts, my feelings are so automatic for me,
right,
that that's going to be what I experience first.
Right.
You know?
Of course.
Yeah.
But that could be like a knee-jerk reaction, you know, which is something that I think we're all guilty of to a point, just because it's such a high passionate kind of a thing. And then, you know, we have a default, and that default is very hard to just kind of stop and go, okay, wait, there might be another side to this, another perspective. But, you know, being able to see things from other people's perspectives helps with our feelings. It helps with other viewpoints. It helps you to, you know, maybe see another person's beliefs and other person's experiences, which in that definition you gave was laying out that a lot of, you know, our perspective has to do with our own personal experiences. And we react off of that, you know. For an example, you take a person and you ask them, you know, are you a glass half full or a glass half empty kind of person? We're staring at the same glass. But this guy over here will say, well, it's half full. And the other person who has a different, you know, way of thinking, maybe they're a little more on the negative side of life, they'll say, hey, it's half empty. So it's funny how different we can be when we're looking at the exact same thing.
Right.
It's pretty fascinating if you get down to it.
Definitely.
I've read that they will ask people, what do you see when you look at this? And it will kind of give you an idea if they're positive or a pessimist.
Right.
I think I'm more positive. What are you?
I don't know. That one's a little bit confusing for me.
Because if you're literal, which you're not negative or you're not super positive, but you're a literal thinker, you're going to say, what would you say? It's half empty.
Right.
So interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So in my research of going a little deeper with perspective, I did find some really interesting stuff, but I know you went deeper. So what did you find, Jeanette, that was really fascinating to you in regards to what happens in the brain when we are effectively trying to put ourselves in other people's shoes or seeing other people's perspectives?
Intentionally looking at things from another's perspective, or what is sometimes termed perspective taking, actually involves the activation of an entire network of brain regions, including areas that are responsible for things like working memory, social cognition, and mental imagery, which is just to describe a few. There were many more than that, actually. And that shows me that practicing intentionally putting yourself into a space where you're attempting to see from another's perspective is actually like a brain exercise. It's actually a way to activate those regions of our brain, because our immediate reactions to things being from my perspective, everything is from my perspective. Right. Those brain pathways are already very formed, are already, deep. We've got those covered. Anytime you attempt to see something from another's perspective, you're actually exercising parts of the brain that we're not always activating.
Sure.
And so it actually expands our ability to think about those things. Yeah.
That's interesting. That there's all kinds of stuff that goes on.
Yes. It seems like such a social thing,
right.
Seeing things from another's perspective seems like such a social thing, when in reality can actually be really, really good for us. And it can be a skill that not only exercises the brain, but as we often see, a lot of times we're attempting to see things from another's perspective because maybe there's a conflict, or maybe there's a problem that needs to be solved, or, we're doing it for these other reasons also. So we get the brain expansion, we get the brain exercise, and we're solving problems, and we're minimizing conflicts at the same time.
Right. That's fascinating. So in that deep dive that you did, what, as far as, is there like a release of dopamine? How our brain reacts to all these things that we're learning all the time, and then something that feels good. Because when I think of putting myself in somebody else's shoes, being in looking at their perspective, what I think is I kind of practice empathy at the same time. Because if you don't have the ability to have empathy, then I don't know if you'd be so good at trying to put yourself in other people's shoes and look at things from their perspective, because it would be all about me, my emotions, my knee-jerk reaction, my assumptions, everything that's, that I immediately go back to, such as you said, once we're wired a certain way, everything kind of tends to be more about how we think and how we feel about something. But if you're able to look at something from somebody else's perspective, whether it's a fight, it's a problem solving, like you mentioned, anything like that. And I would think that empathy would be kind of the leading factor with that. What do you think?
I'm not sure about that, because there's a part of me that thinks with empathy, we might actually handicap our ability to see from another's perspective. There almost has to be a more logical, analytical aspect to it, because it's that's my thinking. Because it's a cognition, it's something that has more to do with mental cognition. I'm not sure that the emotional aspect would play a better role, essentially. Mm-hmm. And I don't know as far as it giving a dopamine hit or anything per se, but I do feel the intentionally seeing from another's perspective, intentionally putting yourself in that space, almost feels like it would stop our habitual way of thinking, and it would almost take us to another neural pathway, another part of a brain or another aspect. And when we thought about the other perspective, it would just strengthen or expand. I really feel it's more of the cognition, but I don't know.
Did I stump you?
Well, no, my brain's stumping me. Thank you. Because there's a level of understanding that would come from it. Yeah, but for some reason I keep thinking that the empathy is going to actually harm our capability, because if we're being empathic,
you would have to care about that other person's feelings to try to put yourself in their shoes or put yourself in their perspective, what they see, what they feel, what's going on. And to me, empathy has everything to do with that. Because if I didn't care or was not empathetic to other people's feelings, I would imagine that I wouldn't really care to put myself in their shoes and look at their vantage point perspective, try to communicate through whatever issue might be there.
Well, one of the exercises that they actually use a lot, though, which is interesting to think about, is to intentionally watch a television show or a movie and picture yourself as the character and to kind of predict activity and not only watch what plays out on the screen, but ask yourself questions like, how do I think that made them feel? Mm-hmm. And in that perspective, there's no caring necessary. It is more a mental activity.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense too. Yeah.
I mean, obviously in personal life, you would probably do it more with people you cared about.
Of course.
I just feel the empathy part, because say I was doing that with my child, not only do I have my perspective, but I also have a perception, an already preconceived notion of who my child is.
Right.
And in a way, I think that could actually harm me being able to have a knowledgeable ability to put myself in their perspective. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It kind of feels like it might be a little bit of an inhibitor. And I could also see how in maybe a workplace, maybe it's someone you don't even know, but maybe your job and their job kind of function around each other as, part of a whole goal. Right. These tasks, maybe you have tasks that flow around someone that you don't even really know. Mm-hmm. But again, being able to put yourself in their perspective as you're problem solving something would still be a valuable tool that you could use in a work environment that you really, besides just caring about people,
exactly.
which there's that. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it has to be. Yeah. It has to be that you care. And to me, when I say that I care, even if I don't know these people, I have empathy for their situation or their feelings, their thoughts. And I think I'm just wired that way. Right. I always have been. I tend to overthink about what somebody may or may not be feeling. And sometimes that's kind of a pain in the butt. But at the same time, it makes it easier to put myself in their shoes and try to feel what they're feeling, and that's their vantage, that's their perspective, that's a good thing. But if you don't have empathy, I don't know if it's possible to always put yourself in somebody else's shoes, because you may not have the need to, because you're not wired that way. You're like, I don't really care what that guy's feeling, or I don't care what he's thinking. And I heard what I heard, and he meant what he meant. And it's like, it's not always that way.
Yeah, it's definitely not automatic. You have to make a concentrated effort to activate that ability to suspend who you are long enough to jump ship and put yourself, it's a very intentional process. It's not something that you're going to blip in and out of at all. I mean, nobody would do, nobody would do that.
You're wired for it, or you're not.
Right.
But absolutely. I like, so that that bit that you said about somebody doing some sort of a survey or whatever, and people watching a show and trying to figure out, how that person felt in that particular scene. Was that part of the studies and information that you just
It's
looked
just
up?
one of the exercises that people do when, even if you're trying to become more compassionate or you're trying to, again, exercise a skill that we don't, it's just not an automatic skill,
Right.
seeing things from another's perspective. So it's just one of the, like an exercise that people can do that will help them be able to get into that space, not necessarily more often, but be in that space a little more fully. It is like a muscle that has to be exercised.
Sure. I could see how that would be.
Right.
And I think honestly that we should be taught something like that or shown something like that as we develop through life and through schooling and stuff, and really focus on trying to, raise good human beings that can be empathetic and then have the ability to put themselves in other people's shoes and realize, hey, that little girl over there may have a pretty tough life, and you don't want to do this or that. We want to think about them. Let's be more thoughtful, more loving, more kind, because not everybody has the same situation at home than you. It's things like that I think is important to help teach our kids, that there's somebody, the person next to you, you don't know their story, you don't know what they've been through, you don't know anything about them, and sometimes it's good to just put yourself in somebody else's shoes and realize, hey, not everybody is the same, and not everybody has the same things and same chances, same opportunities and things, and I think it's important for sure.
Definitely.
I think we need more of that in this world.
Well, speaking of that, there's a 3-step process that I was reading about that I thought was really interesting, and there's a couple reasons that I find it super interesting. I'll just go over it just very quickly with you, and then kind of we can talk about it a little bit. But the 3-step process is, in step 1, you think about a conflict you're having, and you ask yourself questions like, what is it about? Who is it with? How do you feel about it? How do you want to resolve it? And you take a few minutes and you write down your answers. And this helps you process your thoughts and your emotions about the conflict. So that for one gives you that basis, that foundation of where you're coming from, because obviously your perspective is going to be very automatic.
Right.
And step 2, you think about the conflict from the other person's perspective and ask yourself questions like, how do you think they see the conflict? How do you think they feel about it? What were their intentions? Which is really interesting because that one sounds like it could be a real challenge to figure out. And then you write those answers down as well. In step 3, you return to step 1 and you ask and answer your questions again from your perspective, the same questions from the first step, and you figure out if your feelings changed. Did your feelings change about it? Did your answers change? And the fascinating thing is only if we can suspend judgment will we find that the answers changed. So if you're at step 3 and you're thinking, no, I kind of still feel the same way about it, then you haven't fully put yourself in the other person's perspective in step 2 to where there's a more full understanding of maybe both sides of the story.
Right.
And I think that is a way to, again, teach oneself. It's not taught in school, obviously, but to teach oneself how to go about even getting ourselves into that space.
Right.
But I thought it was really interesting because there were a few of them that I was playing with while I was doing that. Just a couple of little light things, just looking at. And your perspective does not change very easily.
Really?
No, I mean, mine didn't. I thought it was really interesting. I had to really kind of dig into it to see if I could think something about the other person enough that would actually change the answers. It was interesting.
I'll have to do that. It is interesting. I do like what you brought as far as the research that you brought and then your take on it, because it's one of those conversations. Again, that's why they call it perspective, because it's, to each his own, right? I mean,
my perspective and yours.
Exactly. I know. And it's just a really interesting word. And when I was thinking about this word, I kept thinking to myself that, God, this is a really interesting thing to think about once you kind of scratch the surface and dive beneath the surface, thinking really what it is and how it affects us all differently, and how we all have different levels of the ability to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes, see things from their perspective. But just the idea of being able to do that, if we all could do it a little more, and take a moment before you react, take a moment before you do what you normally do in a situation, and look at something from somebody else's perspective, or listen to their perspective if you're in an argument or some sort of conflict, or just trying to learn something new. I mean, sometimes we have got to take a moment and listen to the other side, and that will build bridges, and that's good for relationships. It's good for your health. I mean, everything about it is good, and that's kind of our mission, is to dive a little deeper beneath the surface of some things that people just take for granted on a daily basis, and think, oh my gosh, well that is interesting. It's really fascinating, and it's actually healthy when we, build these little bridges and extend yourself out a little more and learn a little more about people. And you mentioned curiosity, and I love that curiosity is at the foundation of so many things that we are operating from. And if it wasn't about us being curious about how that person feels, then we wouldn't seek out their perspective. So it's really interesting, and I appreciate you bringing all that info. Is there any more amazing, enlightening things? Because you always go way deeper, and I love it.
I think that's all I brought.
Okay, I love it.
It's all my ammo.
Well, it's interesting. So anyway, thank you for joining us for another episode of Mahogany and Willow.
Because there's always something important to talk about.